You're probably sick of replacing your office chair every couple years. Or maybe your back is getting destroyed by that cheap chair. Stop buying cheap office chairs. We've got a cheap chair, an expensive chair, and a really expensive chair to walk through all the differences between cheap and expensive chairs, showing you that it might be worth the investment to get rid of that cheap chair. One big difference between cheap and expensive office chairs happens right away during the shipping process. Cheap chairs have the lowest quality packaging. This is done intentionally to keep the price low, but you have a much higher chance for damage as compared to a higher priced chair with stronger cardboard, foam inserts, and protective plastic coverings. Most office chairs ship FedEx or UPS ground, and they are not always gentle with the boxes. Having a nice box and protective packaging can help to save you from the headache of having to wait for replacement parts or a replacement chair because it arrived damaged. Cheap office chairs will almost always require a bunch of assembly. Shipping them completely disassembled allows them to fit in the smallest possible box, which does keep that cost down. But that means that you will be spending around 30 to 60 minutes putting together almost every single component on the chair. And it doesn't always go smoothly. Because the parts are low end, they don't always fit together perfectly for the assembly process. On this cheap chair, I really had to work to get the holes to line up for the armrest screws, and then the screw holes were blocked because there was excess vinyl covering the holes. As you go up in price, you will typically see less assembly. A chair like the Vera will have most of the tedious components already assembled, which brings the assembly time down to closer to 15 minutes, and most of those parts will fit together much more smoothly than on the cheap chair. When we go up to the most expensive chair, this chair comes fully assembled. You don't have to do anything. Just take it out of the box and you're ready to go. Warranty coverage will vary greatly between cheap and expensive office chairs, with most cheap chairs having warranties of 1 year or less, and they will typically have lower weight ratings, somewhere around 200 to 250 pounds. The cheap chair that we have in this video doesn't have a warranty at all, and it has a weight rating of 225 pounds. More expensive chairs will have longer warranty coverage, higher weight ratings, and in some cases, longer usage ratings. The Vera has a limited lifetime warranty with 5 years of coverage on the foam and fabric, and this is for users up to 275 pounds, and it qualifies for standard work hours of 8 hours per day or 40 hours per week. When we bump up to our really expensive chair, the Aeron is going to have 12 years of coverage, and this is going to include everything on the chair. There are no exclusions. This is valid for people 300 pounds plus, and this is a rare scenario where we do see a bump in the usage rating, qualifying for 24/7 usage. Now, this is where a ton of the value comes when going with an expensive chair, because you are getting a ton of peace of mind knowing that you're going to have a really high-end chair for a minimum of 12 years. One area that we probably see the most drastic difference between cheap and expensive chairs is going to be the build quality. When looking at the cheap chair, it's only $80, so it really can only have the most bottom-level, low-end components to keep the price that low. This is what you need to expect from a chair that costs $80, though. There is so little value in the actual material of the chair because this chair is being shipped from China to a warehouse, then from a warehouse to either a store for pickup like we did, or it's shipped to your home. The packaging and those two shipments all cost money. Then we have to consider that the manufacturer of the chair and Target both have margins built into this chair to make money. This leaves a very small amount of value to go into the actual building of the chair. The Vera will be a huge jump in quality as compared to the cheap chair. The chair feels much more solid, it does not have any bottom tier components, and the parts fit together nicely. There's just a lot more substance to the chair, and it is built to last a lot longer than the cheap model is. Going from the Vera to the Aeron will be another huge step in quality. The parts are all high-end, and most of them are designed specifically for the Aeron. The chair feels like it is the most solid out of the bunch, but the biggest separator in my eyes is going to be its fit and finish. Because most of the parts on the Aeron are custom made for the Aeron, they fit together perfectly. The finish and clean look of the Aeron as compared to the other models also speaks to its quality. The Aeron is much more eye-catching and has a much more attractive, modern design than the other models. The adjustments offered on cheap office chairs are typically going to be much more limited as compared to expensive models, and this is going to start with the recline mechanism. Most cheap chairs will have center tilt or swivel tilt mechanisms. This means that the chair will recline from a pivot point right under your seat. The problem with this motion is that your knees will come up as you recline in the chair. This may cause your knees to run into your desk or table and may bring your feet off the floor if you recline far enough. Higher-end models will have synchro tilt mechanisms or mechanisms that were designed specifically for that chair. The Vera is a good example of a synchrotilt mechanism. This type of mech will incline the seat at a lower ratio as compared to your back. This creates a smooth reclining motion while keeping your feet flat on the floor and in a better ergonomic position. The highest end chairs will often have specific mechanisms only found on that chair. Chairs like the Freedom from Human Scale or the Aeron by Herman Miller are great examples of this. The Aeron has one of the nicest mechanisms available, and this gives you one of the smoothest and most comfortable recline motions in the industry. You'll also get a lot more adjustments in general on a more expensive chair. Things like four-way arms are common on more expensive chairs as compared to the fixed arms that we see on our cheap chair here. Things like seat sliders, lumbar adjustments, headrests, and forward seat tilt are not usually available on cheap chairs, as most cheap chairs are limited to seat height adjustment and upright tilt lock. The lack of a seat slider was very noticeable for me while testing the chair because there was a pretty big gap between the front of the seat and the back of my legs, and if I had a seat slider, I'd be able to shore that up and create a much more ergonomic position. Another thing to think about is that the adjustment ranges themselves will typically get larger as you get more expensive in your chair selection. A couple good examples to highlight this are seat height adjustment and arm height adjustment. All three of these chairs have seat height adjustment, but the cheap chair only has 3 inches of travel, which puts its maximum height at the height that would be good for someone that is about 5'10". The other 2 chairs have 5-inch cylinders, so they work for a much wider range of people. The Vera has arm height adjustment, like the Aeron, but the adjustment range on the Aeron is massive, while the range on the Vera is much more limited. One thing that most people don't think about when buying a cheap chair is what happens to that cheap chair after a year or two when you need to replace it. Unfortunately, a lot of these cheap office chairs do end up in landfills after a handful of years of use, which can pose a pretty big problem because they are large, have a lot of components, and do require quite a bit of effort to dispose of. The better the chair, the longer it will last, and the less replacement chairs we will have going into landfills. The Aeron is an amazing example of this. An Aeron chair can last as many as 20 years or more. We consistently see chairs from the 90s or early 2000s available for sale in good working condition. Buying an expensive chair that can last 10 years or more really helps to eliminate a lot of that unneeded waste we have in our landfills. One important thing to consider is the longevity of your office chair and what it will end up costing you per year. How long will that chair last? One good way to get an idea of how long a manufacturer thinks their chair will last is to look at their warranty. When looking at cheap chairs with a 1-year warranty or less, it is safe to assume that parts will start to degrade and wear pretty quickly. After using a cheap chair for a couple years, it is going to feel quite a bit different than when you first bought it. You should probably only expect a chair like this to last around 1 to 3 years. When jumping up to the Vera, you're going to get a lot more longevity out of the chair. When looking at the warranty coverage and having 5 years of coverage on the foam and fabric, I think it's safe to assume that a chair like this will last around 5 to 8 years. And obviously we're going to have the most longevity out of our really expensive chair, the Aeron having 12 years of coverage, and as we previously discussed, seeing chairs on the market being sold 20 years down the line, you're really going to get the most longevity out of the really expensive chair. When we look at the per year cost on these chairs based on their minimum expected lifespans, the cheap chair will end up having a per year cost of around $80, the Vera will cost around $110 a year, and the Aeron will cost somewhere around $128 per year, assuming that you have it fully loaded like we do here. Breaking the cost down per year brings the numbers much closer together. Another thing to consider with the per year costs is that you do not need to pay much more per year to be sitting in a lot nicer chair for that entire time span. Going with the cheap chair can definitely save you some money in the long run, but you will be replacing that chair several times over, and you will be using a low-end product for the entire time frame. Investing a little more money up front can get you into a higher end chair, which means you're using a nicer product for the entire time you're using the chair, and it may give you the longevity needed to make it more cost effective than the cheap chair. Are you ready to start shopping for an office chair? Watch our top office chairs for 2021 video next. Thanks a lot for watching.